And without further ado, we're rolling right into the next briefing. We're fortunate this morning to have the Commander in Naval Sea Systems Command, Vice Admiral Tom Moore. He's a Naval Academy graduate. He's been in nuclear operations all his life. I checked with him. He is one of the successful graduates of the Admiral Rickover interview process, for those of you who know what that's about. I did congratulate him on a great Navy victory over Army this year, last year, but said that's basically last year's news. We'll see them here again in November. He served as PEO of aircraft carriers, the new Ford class carrier. He's commanded at NAVSEA for the last 3.5 years, and though he doesn't have enough on his plate, he's just been tasked by the CNO that he is going to eliminate all ship depot maintenance delays by 2021. So, Admiral, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's good to be here. They gave me this. I play in a rock and roll band, so actually I feel like I'm Britney Spears up here or something with this microphone on my mouth. So thanks to Jim for the invite. I know most of the people that come to this conference are talking big programmatic things, and so I'm here to talk about maintenance and sustainment, which you might be thinking, why is that important to me as an investor? And the last time I was talking at Jim's conference, I was the PO of aircraft carriers and was spending a lot of time talking to Senator McCain at the time, who's got to be one of my best friends. Yeah, that was a joke. So I said to Jim, I said, well, look, I run the Commander Naval Sea Systems Command. I have a workforce of 83,000 people. I got $52 billion running through my command every year. How long do I get to talk? And he goes, you get about 20 minutes, and then you can answer questions. And I said, 20 minutes? I said, I'm coming all the way over, as important as I am, only 20 minutes. And he said, hey, remember one time, Winston Churchill had a guest speaker in, and the guest speaker complained to Winston Churchill. He said, how am I possibly going to tell this audience everything I know about ship maintenance in 20 minutes? And Winston Churchill paused and said, my advice to you would be to speak slowly. So, So I'm not going to speak slowly, but I do plan to spend about the next 20 minutes talking to you about kind of where we are on the sustainment front and why that would be important from an investment standpoint and why that's clearly important to the Navy, I dare say probably to the rest of the services as well. We tend to focus most of our time talking about new construction or great new programs like John Hill was talking to you about previously, but there is a balance. And I think one of the things that's important to remember is if we're going to go to war in the next 10 years, we're probably going to go to war with what we have today. And about 90% of the ships that we have today are going to be around in 2030. So it's important that we maintain and sustain the ships that we have today. If you've listened to the CNO over the last couple of weeks, you know the budget challenges the Navy is facing as we try to get to 355 ships. I think the CNO out at AFCEA West on Monday, he and the Commandant said, hey, with the current top line we have, 305 to 310 ships is probably where we can get to from where we are today, which is at about 295. They also, both he and the Commandant also said, hey, we are not going to hollow out the force. And I think the Navy's learned that lesson the hard way. And so I think it's important to understand that the sustainment piece is a key part of any drive to get to 355. We clearly have to get the construction part and the acquisition side right, but if we don't get the sustainment piece, we're going to have some problems as well. So what I want to talk to you about briefly for about 20 minutes is where is the Navy headed on the sustainment side, in particular in our public shipyards and then in the private sector, which is doing surface ship repair, and then I'll open up the floor to questions. So again, readiness, strategic imperative here, a couple of interesting things. Any read of the National Defense Strategy today would lead one to believe that it's a maritime strategy. I think going forward, I think that obviously the Navy believes that strongly. And you can read in the National Defense Strategy, off the slide there, rebuilding readiness, build a dominant naval force. And as I said, that dominant naval force is pretty much what we have today. We're at 295. We may get to 305 to 310 in the next 4 or 5 years. We're certainly driving to 355. But that dominant naval force is what you see on the paper today. And I found it interesting. So Admiral Gilday came in as the new CNO, and he had an update to the design for maintaining maritime superiority. And he laid out 3 key tenets for the Navy. One was war fighting, the second was war fighters, and the third was building the future fleet. The first thing that he listed under war fighting, the first imperative under there was to improve ship depot level maintenance and modernization. So the good news and bad news for me, the good news is it's the first thing on his list. The bad news for me is it's the first thing on the CNO's list. So it's good. It's getting a lot of attention, as it rightly should. And it's really the most important thing we're working on right now. So I want to kind of give you a sense of where we are on the public side of the house and why ship maintenance in general should be of importance to you. So there's, you can see the chart there on how much money we're spending on ship depot maintenance. So about $7 billion in 2011, and in the 21 budget, we're up to $11 billion. Probably one of the fastest growing accounts that we have out there. So $11 billion a year. If I was to tell you that I'm an acquisition program manager, and between the infrastructure improvements my program is spending $12 billion a year, you'd think, hey, you must be buying an aircraft carrier every year. And that's essentially what I'm doing with this maintenance account. It's an awful lot of money. And frankly, a couple things about this chart. That growth level is not sustainable. We have got to figure out how to tip that cost curve over. But it has gone up for several good reasons. One, it's gone up because the pace that we operated the fleet on from about 2007 to 2013 was exceptionally high. And the ships are getting a little bit older and they're a little bit more complex. So you add all that in there, and the fact that we had spent a lot less money and dug ourselves a readiness hole really explains why that dollar amount has continued to go up. Now, it's going to go up, and even if you look at this, we're at 295 ships today. We're going to get to 305, 310 going forward. One important thing to remember is the size of the submarine force is actually going to dip from about 55, where it is, down to 45. So we're actually going to be building significantly more surface ships that we have to go maintain going forward, and that's pretty important. On the naval shipyard side of the house, this is a key issue for us. So we get a lot of questions, and you've read a lot about, a lot of the discussions about the readiness models that the Navy is using, and is OFRP working? And the CNO had a chance to discuss that the other day. There's a couple of key things that happened for us since about 2000 time frame. From about 1992 to about 2004, the Navy had anywhere from 15 to 12 carriers, no less than 12. And we were in something called the interdeployment training cycle, and that generated presence for us. From about 2004 to about 2013, we shifted over to something called the Fleet Response Plan. During that period of time, we had 11 carriers, and sometimes 12, but no less than 11. We also, during that period, we ran those carriers exceptionally hard. The combatant commanders used the Fleet Response Plan, which provided them additional surge capacity, as an opportunity to go use the fleet. And in many ways, what the Fleet Response Plan was designed for was a kind of a break glass if needed scenario, and not something that we would use it just because you had it. And we tended to use those ships pretty hard from about 2007 to 2013. You'll also notice during that time frame that the naval shipyard size bottomed out in about 2007. So the combination of reducing the numbers of carriers, running them harder, and reducing the size of our naval shipyards led us into an era where we started to deliver a lot of things late out of the naval shipyards, which primarily do nuclear maintenance for us on our aircraft carriers and our submarines. So you had a shrinking force that you were using more, and then the maintenance workforce was coming down, and so we had this perfect storm where we were not delivering things on time. And we were not delivering things on time with a smaller force, which put even more stress on the force going forward. So there was a period of time from about 2011 to about 2017 where almost everything that was coming out of our naval shipyards was late. So we recognized that we had to grow the size of the force. You can see from about 2009, we started to grow the force a little bit. We're up today at a little about 36,000. There's been a concerted effort in the last 4 years to grow the size of the naval shipyard. I think the other important thing to keep in mind as we grew the size of the force, the naval shipyards, is if you look at the average age of the kind of the engineering talent, and then most importantly, that red line is the production workforce, the people, the wrench turners, the welders, the pipe fitters. Not surprisingly, as we hired up, that age of that workforce started to come down. So while we were getting more people, we had a much more inexperienced workforce, which compounded our problems. So we spent a lot of time over the last couple of years trying to figure out how to build learning centers and to take a welder or a pipe fitter and get them to be somebody that we could actually put them down on a nuclear submarine or an aircraft carrier in 2 years, where it was taking us 4 to 5 years before to get there. So there's some exceptional work going on in the naval shipyards, and we're where we need to be from a capacity standpoint, and the results are starting to speak for themselves. 9 out of the last 10 carriers are delivered on time. We've cut in half the delays on submarines, and as the moderator said on the introduction, the CNO has tasked me with a goal for 2020 to reduce the days of maintenance delay by 80%, compared to 19, and by 2021 to eliminate those completely. And I think we're on track to do that. But you can't solve all your problems with just people. And in fact, you can't solve them all with just people or money. That can't be the solution to the problem. Anybody who works in industry knows that if you want to get more productive, you also have to have a layout and a facility that allows you to be productive. Most of our naval shipyards are several hundred years old. Most of the equipment in our naval shipyards on average is 25 to 30 years old. The industry standard in a manufacturing facility today is probably in the order of 10 to 12 years old, and we're double that. So 2 years ago, we sat down with the Congress and said, hey, we need a plan to go invest a significant amount of money into our facilities, the 4 naval shipyards, in something that was known as the Shipyard Infrastructure Optimization Plan, or SIOP. This plan is designed to do a couple things. One, it's designed to upgrade the capital equipment with a funding stream of about $150 million per year. The second thing it's designed to do is upgrade the dry docks. As we move into a new class of ships, Ford-class carriers, Virginia-class submarine Block 5, the future SSNX, each one of those ships doesn't fit in the dry docks that I have today, either from a power or cooling standpoint or just from a sheer size standpoint. So I have to go upgrade the dry docks at the 4 naval shipyards that I have, and that's a significant effort, and in many ways it's a non-discretionary thing. We have no choice to do that. And I'm going to spend about $4 billion in my dry docks over about the next 20 years and about $3 billion in capital equipment. The big piece that we're trying to get after, though, is this optimization of the shipyard. If you were to go to any one of my naval shipyards today, you would find that they were originally designed to build new construction in an era where new construction was a lot more inefficient than it is today. They're not designed for repair, and they're not designed using modern industrial engineering practices. We found that at Norfolk Naval Shipyard, we did some surveys. The workforce at Norfolk Naval Shipyard walks the circumference of the earth every single day getting to and from the job site. So if you own a business out there, and I was to tell you, by the way, 6% of your cost every day is waste because it's just travel, the first thing you do is figure out how to make that more efficient. So this is an example at Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard of what we're trying to do today. The upper left is the current layout of the shipyard, and the red line kind of shows you, based on thickness, where the workers walk today. And what we're trying to get to is the bottom right, the future shipyard there, and you can see in blue, the travel time is significantly less. And what we're trying to do is really build the facilities around the dry docks with the idea that the mechanic as the surgeon. If you go in to get heart surgery, the doctor that's doing the heart surgery is not the one walking over to the table to get the incisors or the new tool. He has somebody they hand it to you. You want your mechanics on the deck plate to stay on the deck plate and do the work. And so we're going to build what we call dry dock production facilities, which put the engineering and the material and the sourcing and the workforce right next to the dry dock, so we can limit that travel time going forward. $21 billion over the next 20 years. That's our initial estimate. We'll see how that goes. These things tend to get more expensive as you go forward. It's a 20-year effort that we've got to invest about $1.5 billion per year, starting in 2022 for about the next 6 or 7 years, starting at Pearl, and then we got some significant dry dock work to do at all 4 of the naval shipyards. It's a really significant effort, as you can see there on the slide. We've already got $3 billion across the fit-up in the President's FY21 budget dedicated to this program, and that number is going to go up. So if you're in the ship construction, if you're in the facilities construction business, or you're in the business that builds big structure or dry docks, there's a great opportunity here, and we're looking for some help as we go build this shipyard going forward. The second piece is the private side of the house. Everybody tends to forget and focus on most of the nuclear work. As I said earlier, 295 ships today, going to get to 305. That only seems like we're going to go up 10 to 15 ships. Keep in mind the number of submarines is actually going to come down. So we're actually on the surface ship side of the house. Those numbers are going to go up. All of our surface ship work today is done in the private sector, primarily in Mayport, Norfolk, San Diego, up in Bremerton, and then in Pearl Harbor. So it's a competitive environment. We're introducing new platforms with LCS, with LPD-17, with DDG-1000, and this has really been a significant challenge for us, mainly because the Navy's acquisition strategy that we put in place a couple years ago was a flawed strategy. Basically, we tried to get out of a cost-plus environment and get into an environment where we would compete each individual availability. And in hindsight, that was a bad way to go do it, because if you're a business out there, you're going to compete for the work, but if you don't know you're going to get the work, you're not going to hire until you're sure you're going to get it. And then, in particular, if you don't know if you're going to get work on the backside, if you lose that particular contract, you're not going to hire. And so we put ourselves into a situation where industry would hire to about 75% of what they thought they needed. we would get the ship into availability. We would award these contracts about 30 days before the availability started, and we were failing significantly across the board. And it was not due to lack of confidence or lack of desire of the private sector. It was really, did not lay out an acquisition strategy for the private sector, which encouraged them to make the investments in their facilities and to have the capacity we needed to get the work done. So you can see here the number of shipyard availabilities in the private sector are going up. That number is going to continue to grow, and it's going to be consistent going forward. If we want to get to 355 ships by 2030, we can't get there by building new construction ships alone. The Navy did a study a couple years ago. If you could have the maximum money available and you could turn on the build yards, Bath, Newport News, Ingalls, et cetera, and said build at the maximum level you can build at as fast as you can, when can you get me to 355 ships? The answer to that question was by 2052. Okay, so 2052 was not something we wanted to put on a bumper sticker, frankly, on the Navy side of the house. And it didn't go over well. You've had Congressman Whitman here. He'd be one of the first people to tell you, hey, Navy, you got the losses 355. What are you going to do about this? So we have to get more productive. We got to figure out new designs on the new construction side. But the other thing is we're going to have to figure out how to keep the ships that we have today longer than we're keeping them today. Good news is they're steel hulls. We know how to do that. And as long as the combat system remains relevant, we can build. So this number, if you're in the private sector surface ship business, if you're at BAE or NASCO or MHI or Vigor, any of the companies that are working on surface ships today, that number is going to go up. And it's something that we're looking to change the strategy that we're doing on the acquisition side to encourage more investment. So the two things that we've done most for the private yard is two things, and this is what industry would tell us. Two things I need you to do. I need you to award the contracts to me earlier. We were awarding them at A-30. Today, our target is to get them out 120 days out with a goal of eventually stretching that out to 6 months in advance. What industry is telling us, if I know I have a contract 120, 180 days in advance, I'll have time to get the workforce I need, I'll have time to buy the material that I need, build an integrated master schedule, and I'll be ready to go. And that is something that we're working on right now. We're not quite there across the board, but the average is going up significantly. I've worked in the nuclear world for years. When I talk about aircraft carriers and I talk about things like A-12, A-24, which are times before availabilities, I'm talking in months. Only in the surface ship world, when I say A-30, am I talking about days. So we got a lot of work to do on this side of the house. We've gotten some good feedback from industry. The second thing that goes along with the availabilities is to try and figure out how do we give them more long-term, stable, predictable work. So instead of contracting these availabilities one at a time, we're going to start bundling them together. In other words, you're going to get to bid on 3 or 4 ships that are kind of heel to toe across a period of about 3 or 4 years. What industry is telling us is if I can go bid on 3 or 4 ships at a time, and then I will grow you the workforce I need in a fixed price environment, my profits will go up, and I'll start delivering these ships on time, and I'll get more productive, and eventually my cost will come down. So those are 2 big important things that we're doing on the private sector side of the house. The last 2 things that I would talk to you about is the Navy has gotten out of what we used to call lowest price technical acceptable contracts. The problem with the lowest price technically acceptable contract is the only thing it focused on was cost. And so I was awarding contracts to companies that had a lot of work in their yard to begin with and didn't have the capacity to get the work done. And so they stacked up like cordwood, and we were delivering late. So we have changed to a best value philosophy, which allows the Navy to look at the capacity of the work you have, what are the works going on in the port, what's your past performance, and put a premium on the value of delivering these ships on time. If you go talk to Admiral Grady or Admiral Aquilino, the 2 fleet commanders, they're not willing to pay anything to get a ship delivered on time. But what they clearly are telling me is the most important thing is to get these ships out on time. Here's an interesting statistic for you. 1992, when I was a lieutenant commander, at the height of the Reagan buildup, the Navy had 592 ships. At that time, about 100 of those ships were deployed around the world at any time. Today, I have 295 ships, and about 100 of those ships are deployed around the world at any time. So all you need to know about the stress on the Navy today is those 2 data sets right there. We've got a force that's about half the size that it was 20 years ago, and I've got the demand signal on the force is the same. So when we deliver ships out of an availability late, whether it's in a public shipyard or in a private shipyard, it causes us significant stress, and it causes us to do all sorts of things with the fleet in terms of keeping them on station longer, putting more stress on the force, and it's something we can't avoid. The last thing that I'll put on the list, and then I'll stop and answer any questions that anybody might have, is Industry says we have withholding on our contracts of about 10%. Basically, every billable period, we withhold 10% of the allowable billing to make sure that we get the ship delivered on time. Industry's come back and says, hey, from a cash flow perspective, that's not working for me, but we need something better. And so what we've agreed on with industry is, look, if you're on schedule with your ship and you're delivering all the reports that the contract calls for, I'm going to reduce that retention from 10% to 1%. So if you're in a contract where your billable fee, your billable is $3 or $4 million in a month on a particular ship availability or more, that's a significant reduction in the amount of money I'm going to withhold, and it's more money in their pocket, and most importantly, it allows them to go pay their second and third tier vendors. What I find is that the BAEs and NASCOs of the world, they do fine, but it's the sub-vendors that are doing the painting and things like that are living paycheck to paycheck on a bank loan where that doesn't work. So all these are designed to help the industry going forward. So in summary, sustainment's a big deal for us. We're spending, along with the infrastructure, probably $12 billion a year. We'd like to tip that over, but that's where we are today, and it's a key component of getting to 355 ships. And if we don't do this well, the acquisition side of the house is going to get starved, and we're going to be able to build what we need to. So I'll stop at that point and be happy to answer any questions that anybody might have. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Admiral. Ingar Grev with 3M. Quick question about, in terms of being able to increase the throughput, let's put it that way, of the shipyards, of Bath Iron Works, Ingalls Shipbuilding, and so forth. What kind of flexibility going forward would the tech warrant holders have in order to be able to address design changes or different construction approaches in order to be able to do that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I'm on the new construction side of the house, same on the repair side. One of the things, if you look at FFGX, I think one of the things that will make that, it's going to make that very successful, is we early on brought industry into the discussion about what are we doing from a technical spec standpoint that is driving cost or schedule in the program, and are there better ways to do that? So we're having a daily discussion with the big build yards and the repair yards about what are things that the government is doing that is causing you problem, and let's have that discussion. The best place to have the discussion is before you actually build the ship. But even after you've built the ship, if we find things that are out there that are causing us challenges from a manufacturing standpoint, et cetera, then we ought to do that. I was at NASCO in San Diego last week. They walked around one of the new T-ships, and they gave me a list of about 40 things that the Navy could do that would drive the cost of that ship down. And I think we've got to continue to do that. So if you're industry out there, that dialogue with us is really important. I tell my folks all the time, hey, if you want to react with a sense of urgency, you got to figure out how to stop doing things that are adding no value to your business. And there's no doubt that over the years, as we have problems, we add new rules in. Just because we have a problem, we're going to add a new rule in. So my rule, what I tell my folks is, hey, if you have something that didn't work right, was it because you didn't have the right rules in place, or is you just didn't follow the rules? If it was because you didn't follow the rules, just follow the rules. Don't put a new rule set in place, and I think that's something that we've got to go really address going forward. So thanks for the question. Yes, sir.
Sir, a question about service life extensions on surface vessels. We really don't have much data on surface vessels beyond about 35 years. The oldest ones we had prior were the nukes, and those were meticulously maintained. And now we have some Tychos that are entering that block. Where do you get the sense of confidence that we can take things like the Burke Flight 1s, which we didn't plan to do SLEP on, and that we can shift to get them into SLEP?
Yeah, so I spent 25 years as an aircraft carrier guy. We keep them for 50 years. The Nimitz class was designed for 30 years. So we have experience. So some of it's a matter of doing maintenance. So, I mean, I did my weapons officer tour on USS Cunningham, DDG-17, and that SM-1 missile that you could shoot 25 miles downrange, really deadly ship back then. And the reality of the fact that we only kept surface ships, even the nuclear cruisers back then for 25, 30 years, was not because we didn't know how to maintain the platform. What the reality was is the combat system became irrelevant, and it couldn't pace the threat. And what I would argue today is with the DDGs in particular, between Aegis and open architecture and vertical launch, we can pace the threat today. So I don't think when we built DDG-51 back in 1989, I don't think anyone envisioned that today that the Arleigh Burke would be our primary ballistic missile defense platform. If you'd asked the people that were building back then, and we were able to do that because of things like Aegis and open architecture. So if you're talking about maintaining the HM&E portion of the house, tanks, the steel structure, we absolutely know how to do that. So I've told the CNO, as long as you're confident that the combat system is relevant, I can promise you from the NAVC side of the house, the maintenance side of the house can keep that ship rolling longer. So I'm confident from a naval architecture standpoint that we can get the Burkes out to 40, 45, 50 years. You'll get to some naval architecture limits at some point. You're seeing on Flight 3 right now. The reason we're probably not going to build a Flight 4 is we've stuffed about as much in there as you can. So you really have no margin for power and for things like lasers and some of the things we'd like to see going forward. But in terms of can you take the force we have today, I think Tyco is probably the exception because of some of the aluminum superstructure issues we're facing. But most everything else out there today, I'm very confident that getting them to 45, 50 years is something that we can do if we're willing to make the investments. It's a great question.
Good afternoon, Admiral. Reggie Robinson with BAE Systems. I appreciate all your comments about the acquisition changes you're doing to better enable the support at private shipyards for maintenance. Can you talk a bit about the rollout strategy for that and the timeline that we're going to see those changes go into place?
So these are already being rolled out. So if I talk to Jared DeMuro, we've had this conversation. So we're headed toward A-120. We are in the early stages of bundling. We have knocked the retention reduction initiative down. All our contracts today will be best value to the government. We're having ongoing dialogue with industry. The Secretary Gertz, with his maintenance sustainment hat on, has had industry in about quarterly for the last couple of years to sit down and continue to get ideas from them. Again, at the end of the day, I'm encouraging that dialogue with industry. My view is professionals embrace scrutiny. We want to be transparent, and we get a lot of great feedback from industry on what we're doing in order to help them out. Look, I had one time I was in Pearl Harbor, one of my captains, I won't give you his name, said to me, the problem with this particular company is they want to make money. And I paused and stopped for a minute, and I thought to myself, gee, if there's a company that's working for the Navy that doesn't want to make money, I'm not sure I want them working for the Navy. So we have to be able to understand that industry needs to be able to make a fair and reasonable profit, and we need to set them up for the success to do that. When we do that, then we get the product that we need on time, and that collaboration is important. So we're in the early stages of rolling all these things out now in one stage or another, and over the course of the next year or two, they'll be across the board on everything we do. Okay?
Sir, if I can take the honor of asking the last question. You've talked a lot, we've listened a lot today about the Navy's shipbuilding plan for the next 30 years. We've also looked at the numbers that don't seem to be going at the rate that it's going to take to get to that number. At the same time, we're talking about schlepping or extending life or bringing old ships, even like Ro-Ros, back on to meet the obligations of the Navy. But those come at a higher cost. How do you balance the cost of maintaining aging systems rather than curtailing them to modernize?
Well, I think, as I said up front, it's absolutely a balance. I want to make sure everybody understands that surface life extension cannot be done at the expense of new construction, because eventually you're going to have to retire them all. I'm just saying that I think we can provide the right balance there. Where there are systems that are costing us too much money to maintain, just like you would with a car, you're going to make the decision to get rid of it. I think ultimately the litmus test for us, again, as I said, is does the platform maintain combat relevancy? If it can do that, then I think we'll look to keep them as long as we can going forward. But you have to have enough resources as well in order to go build the new ships out there. Otherwise, you're never going to get there. And we can't have a situation where all the ships we have today are out of 45, 50 years and we're not building new. We kind of learned that lesson the hard way after the Reagan buildup, where we slowed down and stopped building ships. And then trying to get that industrial base started back up results in things that cost more than you'd like, and you just can't snap your finger overnight and get the industrial capacity that we'd like. The last comment I would leave you with on that line is there's a great book out there called, let's see if I can, Freedom's Forge, and it's written about the industrial might of the United States in World War II, and it's written about what did we do to turn on the industrial might of the United States to win World War II. And it's kind of, in some ways, a nostalgic view that that Pearl Harbor happened and Franklin Roosevelt said, okay, let's go, snapped his finger, and like a light switch overnight, the industrial might of the United States won the war. The reality of it is, if you go read the book, it took 4 or 5 years for the industrial might of the United States to turn on. And by that time, we'd almost already won the war. And so today, that's our big challenge, is how do we keep the industrial base healthy in the unlikely event that we actually go to war, but also so that we can get to the 355 that we're at today. Okay? So thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Admiral Moore.